Welcome back to Ivy Unleashed. Today is a special day. We're talking about one of my favorite topics. Any guesses? Anyone listening? It's gut health.
Me.
And we have on coach and podcast host of The Perfect Stool. Yes, The Perfect Stool, Stool. Such a great name, Lindsey Parsons. Lindsey, welcome to Ivy Unleashed.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, we're excited to unpack gut health because we've talked about it a lot, but I think what I really love about you, Lindsey, is you are not afraid to like really break things down with all the different topics of gut health. And when Brooke has gone viral for posting her story, the number one topic I feel like people love is when we talk about constipation. And so it's like these topics though, you know, sometimes like as women, they don't want to talk about it, or it's like, oh, you don't want to say it, but a lot of women are experiencing it. And so that's not the only thing we'll talk about, but I'm really excited that this is in your wheelhouse, that we can kind of break down different parts of gut health and how to improve it, because ultimately it makes us feel better with our mental health, our physical health, all of it. But you also have a story, and this is what I really love about you too, is when we have on guests that are taking something they've gone through that was really hard and alchemize it into helping other people. Just such beautiful work, right? To help the person that you once were. So can you tell our listeners about your story and what kind of led you to becoming a gut health coach?
Sure. Well, it's kind of hard to say where it all started, but I think in retrospect, it all started when I was living in Costa Rica. And this was, at this point, basically 30 years ago. And I got food poisoning. It was entirely my own fault. I put some mayonnaise in a washing machine with some ice packs while we went away for the weekend and came back, and it was already warm, and I still made tuna salad with it.
No.
Yes. And got a terrible case of food poisoning. So did my boyfriend, who then became my husband at the time. And his, did not turn into what mine turned into. Mine turned into a lifelong struggle with what is called post-infectious IBS. So you get food poisoning, and then your body mounts an immune response to a certain toxin that is in the certain bacteria called CDTB, or cytolethal distending toxin B. And then what happens is your body then, over time, with that elevated immune response, gets confused and sees a protein that is important in the migrating motor complex, which cleans bacteria out of your small intestine. And your body gets confused and goes after this other protein called vinculin. And when you have elevated vinculin antibodies, then you have an ongoing autoimmune attack on your migrating motor complex, essentially. And then you have stagnation in your small intestine, which turns into SIBO, or small intestine bacterial overgrowth. And you have bloating after you eat. And so I started having bloating, but it wasn't immediate. I remember the bloating then turns into typically either, not the bloating, but the sort of buildup of either bacteria or methanogens can then grow into either SIBO D or IBS-D, which is with diarrhea or loose stool predominant, or more rarely it can turn into IBS-C or EMO, which is now called intestinal methanogen overgrowth, because it can happen in the smaller large intestine, and they're not actually bacteria, they're methanogens, which are from the kingdom Archaea, not from bacteria. They're similar, those single-celled organisms.
How old are you at this point?
At the point of which all this is happening?
Yeah.
I was like 24, 25.
So you're dating someone, and after you eat, you're either bloated or have diarrhea all the time. I'm just like putting this in perspective of like, you're starting to date someone, you're like constantly having, like, I remember having stomach issues when I was dating someone, and like, I didn't want to go to the bathroom in their house. So I was like, I got to go home,? So I'm just like, imagine being a woman and like having this experience every time you're like.
We've been living together for a while, so it was not.
Oh, okay.
Not like a big deal in that sense, and very open about those sort of things. So I did bloat after I ate pretty much every time. And I never actually had terrible diarrhea. Like some people have IBS and they have diarrhea like 6 times a day. I was never like that. I just sort of had loose stool once or twice a day. It was never so bad that it was like I couldn't go anywhere or anything like that. So that went on for many years. And ultimately, I started developing some autoimmune diseases because when you have this kind of dysbiosis in your gut, it ultimately leads to a leaky gut, which then starts to send, proteins that are half digested out into the system. And then your body reacts to that. So I developed Hashimoto's thyroiditis and was also diagnosed with pernicious anemia near the same time, which is inability to digest B12 in your stomach. And then also I was diagnosed with ITP, which I was subsequently, that diagnosis was removed, but because of a low platelet count.
What kind of doctor, sorry to keep interrupting, I'm just trying to piece this together because I'm just thinking of the process. So you are getting diagnosed with things as you have these symptoms. Like what kind of doctor were you seeing?
So first it was my general practitioner who felt that my thyroid was enlarged and sent me for an ultrasound of my thyroid, and they found nodules. And they saw the damage from Hashimoto's. So then, because of my TSH was still normal, and subsequently I did reverse it, so I never ended up having to go on thyroid hormone. And then I was sent to a hematologist when my platelet count was low, and he noticed that my B12 count was low. I said I had tingling in my hands, and I was in the hundreds on B12, which is very dangerous because you can have permanent nerve damage.
Oh.
And then, subsequently lost to the diagnosis of pernicious anemia because my antibodies disappeared, but then, still have always had to use sublingual B12 to keep at normal levels. And I got a shot of it. That's actually one of the ways that you reverse pernicious anemia is you get a shot of B12. And I got one shot of B12, and that seemed to do the trick. So I don't have to keep getting shots of B12.
So as you're on medication, you're getting diagnosed, are you feeling better? Like, is your gut improving?
I haven't healed my gut yet.
Okay.
At this point, I'm still within the world of conventional medicine, and they've diagnosed me with an autoimmune disease. Nobody has diagnosed what's going on in my gut. I know this now in retrospect, but nobody's diagnosed it. Eventually, I did see a gastroenterologist and had an endoscopy because I had reflux too. I had also had reflux and determined I was lactose intolerant much earlier than that, and had reflux for years, had a cough, which can, silent reflux, LPR, they call it, laryngopharyngeal reflux. So I had a cough that after I ate, I would just kind of be like, I still occasionally have that, but it was bad. I was kind of constantly coughing, and was put on inhalers for a while. Then I was put on PPIs, took proton pump inhibitors for 10 years. And then eventually, once I started kind of cluing into all the gut stuff and reading about it, then I started thinking, okay, wait a second, this stuff I can reverse this. Especially when I was diagnosed with autoimmune diseases, I was like, I'm not just going to accept that. I saw a endocrinologist who said, I said, well, what's the progression of this? Like, how do you reverse this? What's the root cause? How do you undo this? And, she was like, well, you just keep taking more and more thyroid medicine until your thyroid is sufficiently destroyed, and then you get it removed.
Wow.
And you said, I don't think so.
Hell no. like
good for you.
Not how this is
And
gonna go down.
did I catch that you said you also reversed Hashimoto's?
Yeah.
Okay. Whenever you want to get into that, I want to hear about that too, but
Yeah.
keep going with your story.
And I had also been going through infertility through all of this too. So I had gone through that, which no doubt was a result of the fact that I didn't have an optimally functioning thyroid and my hormones were off and all that. So it was after the diagnosis of the autoimmune diseases, and this was now 2014, around there. So I was, this was many years later, and I had just been dealing with the gut symptoms for years. And then I started reading about things, and then I learned you can reverse this stuff, like the Hashimoto's. So I was going after the Hashimoto's first, really. So then I went on, went gluten-free, went dairy-free, did a whole elimination diet, everything, the seed oils, the corn, soy, sugar, everything, and ended up sort of settling on gluten, dairy, and soy after I pulled things back in and didn't seem to have a reaction. So then I stayed off of those foods and started tracking my antibodies, and also had gone through a supplement protocol to kind of cleanse the liver and such. And then I saw my antibodies had started to come down, and then, eventually they came down to normal over several years. And they have, at this point, they've been at normal for like 4 or 5 years. So now, like, I had gone back to eating gluten, although I'm pulling back because I feel like I might feel some autoimmunity coming back. But I've been eating gluten pretty regularly now for a couple of years because it had been so long since my antibodies were elevated. I wasn't concerned about it. And in terms of the gut stuff, eventually I saw a gastroenterologist. He basically just sort of dismissed it all. And then I eventually found a functional medicine doctor because I had started to hear about functional medicine and that was a thing. And so I saw a functional medicine doctor who diagnosed me with SIBO and put me on rifaximin. Took that actually first he gave me some herbal supplements for a month. It didn't really clear it up. And then I did rifaximin for 2 weeks and also, got on betaine HCl and digestive enzymes and all that kind of stuff and went through their protocol, and that fixed things for a little bit, but then it came back, which it does because you've got this autoimmune thing going on where your intestines are stagnating. So it's just going to keep coming back. And then over time, and then it was, a few years after that, I trained as a gut health coach. And then I trained as a health coach and then began slowly but surely interviewing people about gut health and getting more understanding of that. And then I learned how to treat myself. And so then now I'm kind of into more of a maintenance phase where, yeah, it'll come back, but I know what to do with it. I know how to treat it. And so I can just kind of keep it in check. I have yet to resolve the elevated vinculin antibodies, but I've got some attempts I'm going to try. I've got one more thing in my pocket at least.
So you're saying that this SIBO for you, it flares up and you know how to get it back at bay, but not to completely remediate it. Yeah.
Right. So my most recent attempt to try and completely get rid of it was using low-dose naltrexone, which is really good for a lot of autoimmune diseases. It's a prescription, but it's super safe. That has not seemed to impact my SIBO at all. Mm-hmm. And I do actually take sort of a low dose of an antimicrobial, but it's also just a generally healthful supplement called MSM, which is the sulfur in it kills bacteria and yeast. And so I take a low dose of that every day to try and keep things in check. And I also am hoping I can have the willpower and the time and separation from food to, at one point, try the prolonged fasting mimicking diet for 5 days and see if that helps to reverse my autoimmunity. So those are the sort of things I have in my pocket to still try.
It's funny. I feel like the gut health world is so small because as you're speaking, I'm like, yep, this weekend SIBO came back for me. And I'm like, oh, shit, I just got off low dose naltrexone because that really wasn't helping. And I'm like, is this doing anything? So I feel like there's these terms and these, I don't want to say buzzwords, but these words that, if you have gone through the functional route of gut health and you're still struggling, you're like, yep, tried that. Yep, tried that. Yep, tried that. So I'm curious, a client of yours, what are certain clients coming to you for, and what have you been able as a coach to reverse and kind of help them through? I'm thinking of, someone listening that's like, yes, I'm struggling with my gut health. I have this bloating. Maybe what's your protocol that you would start them with so that someone listening's like, okay, I've got a little hope, to be honest.
Right. So a typical profile is people are coming to me with either a diagnosis like inflammatory bowel disease, often colitis, occasionally Crohn's, or they're coming to me with just general gut symptoms that have not been diagnosed as anything or have been diagnosed as IBS. So, or occasionally they've already seen their doctor and they've gotten a SIBO diagnosis. They've done one round of rifaximin or rifaximin plus other things like neomycin for intestinal methanogen overgrowth, and then that hasn't really worked. Or they're coming with an autoimmune disease of some sort. So those are the kinds of things that I typically work on. And, for simple cases, some people have simple cases of SIBO. You treat them once, they're good, they're done, Other people have EMO, and that takes a lot longer to get rid of just because maybe they have really elevated gases to start on a breath test. Then inflammatory bowel disease is something that I see a decent bit of too, and have definitely been able to bring people to the point where they are no longer experiencing that constant diarrhea and those symptoms, and where their antibodies, their calprotectin rather, gets down to normal ranges, or their lactoferrin gets down to normal ranges, and when their colonoscopies are clear and they're not seeing any signs of it anymore. So yeah, those are all things that are reversible, and Hashimoto's definitely seen clients that have reversed that, other autoimmune diseases as well.
Okay, I love it. I feel like I have a lot of questions. You guys are in your gut health world, and there's some things I don't understand from what both of you have already said. So for the listeners that are like, wait a second, back up. Okay, number one, how do you know if SIBO comes back? Like, what are the signs of having SIBO? And what is SIBO? Let's go there too.
Yeah, so SIBO is small intestine bacterial overgrowth, and you can have that for various reasons. One of the most common is that post-infectious IBS presentation where you've had the food poisoning that then leads to recurrent SIBO. So the biggest sign is bloating, without question. The biggest sign is that after you eat, you bloat. Okay. Pretty much every time, unless you've gone on a special diet. If you've gone like a low FODMAPs diet, for example, then you might not bloat every time because you're avoiding the fiber that the bacteria are fermenting. And then SIBO used to be divided into SIBO-C for constipation, and SIBO-D for diarrhea, and SIBO-M for mixed. Now they break it out a little bit differently. And then there's also hydrogen sulfide SIBO, which is a very particular type of bacteria that are hydrogen sulfide producers. And then they've now broken out intestinal methanogen overgrowth as a different condition because it's or also sometimes called LIBO or large intestine bacterial overgrowth, even though it's not bacteria. So that's why they've renamed it, because it's the methanogens. So it's intestinal methanogen overgrowth, which can be in the small or the large intestine or both.
Okay. Basically just have bacteria and nasty things in places that shouldn't be. And bacteria shouldn't be in your small intestine, and it is. And so for me, it's like everything I eat, it just reacts to it. And what Lindsey's saying with when you have fiber, then it's fermenting. And so for me, it just feels like it's just gurgling in my stomach.
Got it. And you mentioned, is it EMO you said?
EMO.
What's that?
Call it EMO. Intestinal methanogen overgrowth.
Oh, got it. Okay.
Right. So it's pretty much one organism, Methanobrevibacter smithii, that is causing that. And the other ones with SIBO, there's a few organisms. One is E. coli, another is Klebsiella, but that's actually a hydrogen sulfide producer. So they've sort of isolated which ones are causing SIBO. So there's other hydrogen sulfide producers like Desulfovibrio and Fusobacterium that may also be present in hydrogen sulfide SIBO. But the bacteria that typically start this all off are actually like common ones like Campylobacter and E. coli. And I think there's one more, Salmonella could be one that starts the whole process off, but that's not one that would typically stay. Like if you had a high level of Salmonella ongoing, you wouldn't be able to tolerate that. Your body will clear that, but you can still end up with that post-infectious IBS presentation.
Mm-hmm. Man,
for me, it was E. coli. E. coli, Giardia, H. pylori, some fun buddies I've had. And I figured that out through a GI map test. Is that where you would first have your patients start, or what would you recommend?
Yeah, so I do always start with either a stool test or a breath test or both. And at the moment, I'm preferring the Tiny Health Pro is what I'm using with most of my clients, because it's a metagenomic sequencing. Plus, you can get all of the gut health markers like secretory IgA and calprotectin and lactoferrin and...
Through the stool or through the breath one?
Yeah, stool. Pancreatic enzymes, all that. Then I also like the US Biotech GI Advanced profile, because that has all the markers for the short chain fatty acids. But if you have a suspicion of H. pylori, it's also got the H. pylori plus all of its virulence factors. So I sort of alternate between those two tests right now.
Got it.
I don't use the GI map anymore because it doesn't have the short chain fatty acids on it. Mm-hmm. And it's not as expansive in terms of the bacteria that it covers. Like I really want to see all of those hydrogen sulfide producers, because I'm seeing a lot of cases of hydrogen sulfide SIBO recently.
Yeah, and this is about getting to the root cause. Like if you've gone to a GI doc, you feel like you've done all the things, you've changed the diet, you're still not getting answers. I think just having a clear picture of this is actually what's going on inside of you. Yeah, it does take having to poop. So if you're constipated, that's another issue, which I would love to segue into constipation. What causes it? I know we talked about SIBO, but aside from SIBO, if you're not dealing with SIBO, people come to you and they're constipated. What advice do you give them?
So I always start, okay, so there's first is the most obvious things, and I kind of assume they've already been there, but I will occasionally ask, are you hydrating sufficiently? Like, are you drinking half your body weight in ounces of water? So, you weigh 150, you should be having 75 ounces of water a day. That's sort of a basic. Are you moving your body? Are you exercising at all, or are you just sitting around all day? These are sort of obvious starting points. And then, are you getting sufficient fiber in your diet? And a lot of times, by the time people find me, these are people who can't tolerate fiber. They have fiber, it's painful, it gets stuck, it's horrible. But a normal person who's just having a little bit of constipation, like my stool are kind of hard, or maybe I'm going every other day kind of thing. Usually it's just a question of, are you getting enough fiber in your diet? And the mainstay of fiber for me is beans and lentils. Like there's just no way you're going to get enough fiber in your diet just eating lots of fruits and vegetables. You got to have the beans and lentils. They're just powerhouses of fiber. And they really feed the good gut microbes. So that's kind of a starting point. Of course, there are, obvious foods that are good for constipation, like, kiwi are really good. And of course, prunes and prune juice and all those things. So those are the basics. Then beyond that, a big one to me is magnesium. Like most people are not getting enough magnesium. Probably half of people in the US are magnesium deficient. So that's really a starting point for me, usually recommending magnesium citrate before bed. And, I like the powder form, the Natural Vitality Calm that you just mix in water, and that seems to work really well for people. So sometimes that's enough to pull people out of that cycle of constipation. And then vitamin C also, higher doses of vitamin C, like 1,000 milligrams a few times a day. So that's usually a starting point. If that's not sufficient to clear things, that might be sufficient to get things moving, but that doesn't necessarily mean you've hit the root cause of it. I'm still going to want to look further. Like, do they have a methanogen overgrowth? Do they have this emo presentation? Or H. pylori can also be a cause of constipation. So if they're having other upper GI symptoms, gastritis or potential ulcers or, reflux, that kind of thing. So I'm going to be asking about that. So that's usually where I'm looking for constipation.
I love that. I think too, it's nice, start with these basics. And if we still got the problem, let's look into it deeper, because sometimes it could just be like you said, so many people are deficient in magnesium. That's why we're taking it too. And it helps with our mental health and our physical health and our sleep, all of the things. And so what I'm curious about with your work, and I know I've heard a lot about the gut and the brain being connected and having to do so much with your mental health or past traumas and those types of things. How much of that do you see in your work where people need to focus on their mental health or therapy or those types of mental health pieces of it to supplement the work that you're doing with any of the protocols?
I would say probably 30 or 40% of the people that I'm working with, I think, seem to have an obvious issue with anxiety, which I feel like may be at the root, or they're very type A, or they're very stressed out in their work. And I imagine, or I hear from what they're telling me, that there's an adrenal issue underlying how this all started. So what I see very commonly on the stool test is low secretory IgA, which is your gut immune defense system. So that's in your mucus-lined surfaces, you have this immunoglobulin A that is doing its first line of defense. If that's low, or if your stomach acid is low, those are your first two lines of defense against incoming pathogens, which are going to be coming in with your food all the time. So if those are low, then you're not going to be able to protect yourself from just the basic stuff coming in. So that to me is a sign that there's something going on higher up, right? So there's so much stress that they can't keep up these, or there's a nutritional deficiency, so they can't keep up these basic immune, first line of defenses. Mm-hmm. So I'm looking at, of course, vitamin D. Is that normal? Because that's super important to the immune system. I'm looking at zinc. I'm looking at fish oil, omega-3 fatty acids, seeing if those things are sufficient.
What I feel like the answer right here for me is move to a beach, get vitamin D, eat some seafood, manage the stress somewhere in the sun. I don't know. I think it's important to acknowledge stress in this, right? It's such a huge component of how our body works. And I just feel like we can't hear it enough, that really take an inventory of what's stressing you out. And that doesn't mean it's totally part of the protocol. You're going to maybe have to do some supplements or change different things when it comes to testing or whatever. But the stress can cause all of this, right? Like like you said, the adrenals. And so I just don't want to miss that when we're talking about this, because our mental health is everything. And I know they're so connected.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And when I hear things like, I wake up exhausted, or I'm totally wired at night and I can't sleep, then I'm clued into the fact, or I have to drink, several cups of coffee just to get going. Then I know they've got a potential adrenal issue. Or I've got salt cravings. Like, those are usual signs of adrenal issues. Then I'll probably test the adrenals. I don't do it by default with everybody, but when I start to think, or if we're going through everything and like we just keep fixing the gut, but it's just not getting better, then I'm like, okay, I think we need to look higher up. Then I might go back to the adrenals.
Yeah.
It's always sort of there's always an interplay between like how much can people afford in testing, because I don't want to be one of these functional medicine providers that's like, I'm sorry, you got to start with these $1,000, $1,500 worth of testing, and before I even look at you. Like, I'm trying to find the minimum amount of testing necessary to help someone. So it's always that, interplay between those two issues.
I love that you're conscious of that, because that stresses people out even more to have to throw all that money.
I was going to say the stress of having to keep working and testing, and for me, I'm like, it's exhausting of trying to figure out what's the root cause and how do you fix it, and it's isolating. You're changing your diet and your lifestyle and so many changes. So Lindsey, I'm curious for you, how did you support your mental health and your stress levels? Like, what was really helpful for you when you were in the midst of trying to figure this out, and what you found was healing?
Well, I've always been a regular exerciser, so that's one piece of it. And at the time, I think I was pretty diligent in prayer and that sort of thing, so that was helpful. Nowadays, I meditate daily, and I do breath work every night before I go to bed. So those are some of the things I currently do. Honestly, I don't know if I was tending to my mental health super well. I probably was going through therapy at the time, but I can't say that. Even though I had all this going on, I can't say that it was like super stressful for me, because again, like I said, I was not one of these people who couldn't leave the house because I had diarrhea 6 times a day. Like, that would be a different level of stress. I never had that. I just had like, okay, it's just like, this is like a 10 wiper,
It's just annoying.
Yeah, it was more of an annoyance. Like, and I can't eat these foods, this bloats me if I go eat a pizza, like I'm going to be rolling.
But still, that's a lot of things, like the prayer and the breath work and the meditation and the exercise, like
therapy,
things to be really intentional about. And for me, Brooke and I are in different boats, where like she's had firsthand experience living this, right? And first of all, I just want to send compassion and empathy for anybody that is trying to figure this out, because it is to figure this out on top of everything else you're managing in life is a lot. And being able to just like be at a football party and not be worried about how bloated you're going to be after, if you have to leave, if you feel sick. Like, I just want to send some compassion and empathy to everybody listening that's tuning in for those reasons, And what I notice, in my late 30s and having friends in that range, is I'm noticing a ton of food sensitivities coming up. It's like all of a sudden nobody can eat anything. And so I'm curious, like, is it the age range I'm in? Is it something having to do with that, where all of a sudden everybody is sensitive to everything? Or what do you think is going on with that?
So I think that there are relatively few actual food sensitivities, which is to say that that's the root cause, right? There's celiac, of course, when people are actually having autoimmune disease where they don't tolerate gluten, and there is gluten intolerance. And sometimes that seems to be the root cause for a relatively small number of people. And you will see that on the stool test. You can see elevated antibodies, and there are much more complex tests of gluten. And probably everybody would show up with at least on the complex gluten antibody test, everybody would show up with some of it. Like, I think that these just a more kind of inflammatory food. That being said, the average person can probably tolerate it. I think that gluten, dairy, possibly soy, corn, maybe these are probably real food sensitivities. I think most of the other ones are just a reaction to dysbiosis leading to leaky gut, and inevitably that means that food is leaking out, and if you're eating a lot of some food, you're going to become sensitive to it if you have a leaky gut. So it doesn't matter if that's a healthy food or if it's it's just what you're eating the most of. And I see that, anytime you run a food sensitivity test, and I rarely do because I don't think there's much utility there, because you're basically just saying, do you have a leaky gut or not? And if you see that and inevitably they always are sensitive to virtually everything, they're eating mostly what's on that, showing up as sensitive. So I don't tend to do a lot of that. I'm much more interested in correcting the dysbiosis. And then if we're still seeing elevated antibodies to gluten on the stool test, then I'm like, okay, I think you need to be gluten-free, long term. Other people say I'm fine with gluten. I don't see any difference. And I say, yeah, there's nothing showing up on the test. Go for it.
I feel like food sensitivities is one of those things where depending who you ask, you get a different answer. And I don't want to call it a myth, but I think there are a lot of those things in the gut health community. Right? You think greens powders and all of these supplements that, is this legit? Or do they have really good marketing? So I would love to hear your take, Lindsey, on some maybe gut health myths, some products, some things out there that you've heard your clients come to you saying they've tried, or things you've seen that you're like, I wouldn't invest your time or money in those things.
Okay, so I probably would say this. Don't invest your time or money on any gut health supplement if you don't have sort of a comprehensive plan. Like, don't go, okay, first I'm going to try this probiotic. Now I'm going to try that probiotic. Now I'm going to try this antimicrobial thing. Now I'm going to try that one. Like, often it takes a combination of different antimicrobials together, plus probiotics, plus betaine HCl to support your stomach acid, plus digestive enzymes. Like, you might need all those things to really start to clear things up. And you might need multiple rounds of them. And you might need them in doses that are, the dose on the package usually is what you're supposed to take once. Like, if the dose on the package says, 1 to 2 capsules, it probably is 1 to 2 capsules 3 times a day, right? But they're not going to put that on the package because they want to sort of protect themselves from liability. So most people are underdosing themselves, for one thing, on the supplements they need. The other thing is a lot of people are just using really strong antimicrobials. So things like oregano oil and berberine can hurt your good bacteria. So for me, those are like kind of last line of defense supplements. They're not first line of defense. So I would sooner see somebody try something like serum bovine immunoglobulins, which is one of the supplements I make, or butyrate, or pomegranate husk, or spore-based probiotics, things like that are much more gentle antimicrobials first. And if it's hydrogen sulfide SIBO, I have a completely different protocol. It has nothing to do with antimicrobials. It has more to do with sort of changing the way your biochemistry is working. So I guess that's what I would say. And yes, there is tons of very impressive marketing out there. And, like the Dr. Gundry's. My dad's constantly sending me Dr. Gundry stuff.
Yeah, what do you think about Dr. Gundry?
I mean, he's against lectins. I mean, I'm not sure how wholesale against them he is, but that's like some of the most healthy food, in beans and lentils. I mean, soak them, cook them properly, rinse them, all that before you cook them. But like, those are one of the most healthy foods. So I think there's a lot of really good marketing, and then there's people out there who are like, absolutely no gluten, no grains, whatever. That's their whole thing, and people fall into these grooves, I think, and that becomes their shtick. That becomes what they are known for, and every person who comes to see them gets that same treatment. Because I've had clients who've seen these big name people, and they're just throwing the same magic dust at each person hoping it's going to work. And it doesn't work for a lot of people because they've just got one protocol and one plan that goes for everybody. So I would say you got to be wary of the marketing. It is really good. There's very, very nice marketing out there for a lot of things. And no one thing is likely to solve the problem for anybody. You need testing. You need to find out what is actually going on. Here's just one example. Okay, I had a client with inflammatory bowel disease, and he had a not so great gut test from the UK, and I worked with that and worked with him, and things were not getting better in certain ways. Like, he started having sore throats and started having more issues. We run a good gut test. In this case, it was a GI map. And we find like all this really dysbiotic stuff. I can't remember what it was, like maybe I think it was like a hemorrhagic E. coli. I mean, there was just like, his gut was a mess. And without the proper testing, you don't know what you're dealing with. Mm-hmm. So you don't know how to fix it. Now, once we started fixing that, then like he was doing much better. So you actually have to know what you're dealing with. You can't just throw random supplements at it.
I think that's a great point, because sometimes you're like, I've heard this worked for so-and-so, I'm going to try it, you know, and it's on the shelf at the store, or you get the ad that comes through your
and feed. It's cheaper to experiment, or you are so desperate that you hear someone had luck with it that you're like, you know what, I'm willing to try. I think it just comes down to what is your case, like how inflamed and how kind of far deep are you, that yes, you need to know what you're working with. And if you're open to spending the money and kind of trial and error, knowing it might be a complete waste of money, like you have to do what's best for you. And I think telling everyone to test when they might not have the financial means to, right, is like, okay, what can we do that can support you and get you to a place where you feel okay? Because I think too, there's so many practitioners out there, there's so many tests that it can be overwhelming of like, where do you even start? So I think finding a practitioner you trust, and I love, Lindsey, what you said about you don't have to get all of the tests, but let's find out in your financial wheelhouse what makes most sense for you. And I think there's a stress level too of it, of trying to test so many different things and so many different protocols that you're like, whoa. Like, how do I even like wrap my brain around all of this, right? Like that, I think that's something that's not talked about in this space either, is how complicated it can be. And unless you have years and years of experience, these words, you're like, what the hell language are you speaking? So I think meeting people where they're at is really important. And for anyone listening, I just want to let you know, like, there are people that can and will hold your hands and make it manageable.
And I'm very sympathetic to the person who can, because honestly, you know, for most of my life, I couldn't have afforded the kind of services that I provide, right? Like, and I'm the kind of do-it-yourself person who would just experiment on myself endlessly. Like I've thought for years about, should I hire a marketing person in my business? Never was willing to spend on it. I'm glad I never did, because honestly, it all worked out. But at the same time, like, I'm just one of those do-it-yourself kind of people. I get that there are people like that, and there's people who can't afford it. So if you are one of those people who really just can't afford to see someone, there are some supplements you can take that are not going to cause harm. Let's put it that way, right? Like serum bovine immunoglobulins are not going to hurt you. If you start with those and you follow the dosage, at least on my product, I say, you know, for two scoops twice a day would be like the high level dosage. And you have some gut things and you give that 6 weeks, like that is not going to hurt you, and you might fix what you've got going.
And will you explain to people exactly what that is?
It is the immune system of a cow pulled out of the plasma and put down into a powder.
What?
It is just immunoglobulins. So colostrum, which comes from dairy, will have immunoglobulins in it to some percent, like maybe like 30%. The serum bovine immunoglobulins, I would think, are about 60% immunoglobulins. So they're twice as powerful. So it takes a lot less of them to do the job. So basically they just adhere to any pathogenic bacteria, all of the major pathogens that people have, even yeast, like candida overgrowth, even some of the bacteria that cause SIBO. So yeah, it's even effective in inflammatory bowel disease. So that's like a harmless supplement that anybody could try to try and heal their gut. There are adjuncts to that you can also try. Obviously, the magnesium, vitamin C, if you're constipated. If you're on the other end with the diarrhea, the other one that anybody could try pretty safely, I would say, unless you're constipated and have a history of polyps, you don't want to necessarily take a lot of butyrate if you have a history of polyps, because butyrate does feed the cells of the colon. Therefore, if you have polyps, that could cause them to grow. So I certainly wouldn't use butyrate long-term if you had any kind of history of colon cancer or of polyps. But that being said, butyrate feeds the cells lining the colon. A lot of people have, dysbiosis in the colon, and the loose stool is a sign of that. They have an overgrowth of proteobacteria in particular, and butyrate will help heal the cells lining the colon, so they stop pulling in oxygen to feed themselves. And when you pull in oxygen, you start encouraging the growth of these bacteria that can live in the presence of oxygen, the facultative anaerobes. And then the ones that have to have a completely hypoxic or oxygen-free environment, which are the ones that produce butyrate themselves, the Faecalibacterium prausnitzii and the certain Clostridia and Rosaburia. Those are the ones that you want in your colon, and they produce butyrate and the other short-chain fatty acids. And when you take butyrate, it turns that whole process around and it seals up your colon, gets the oxygen out of there so that the ones that are causing the loose stool, decrease in number. So butyrate is a great adjunct for somebody who has loose stool, and it will firm up your stool almost immediately.
Okay. Oh, I love these like starter points. Mm-hmm. And I love too what Brooke said where, this can feel isolating, and to have, I even just like think anything you're doing when you're changing something with your health, having someone hold your hand, like a health coach, a gut health coach, in some capacity of like, I know I just want to get tested. I want the answer. But then like the words you're using, I would definitely want you on the call with me so I could be like, what are we talking about here? Like, what did you just say and why, And so I think it's really important for people to know, 1, they can follow you, 2, they can listen to your podcast, and 3, they could message you to be like, should I work with you or not? Or can I ask you a quick question, or how that would work? So can you tell everybody like, okay, I know I need some help, maybe some testing, but like, I really want to check with Lindsey first. How can they find you, follow you, and reach out to you?
So my website is highdeserthealthcoaching.com, and I offer a free 30-minute breakthrough session for anyone who wants to just talk to me and see if it's a good fit. So I'm happy to do that. And then usually, depending on the severity and the length of what's going on, maybe I'll suggest they get testing right away. Maybe I'll suggest we have a first appointment to do a full, medical history and understanding before we decide on what test, because sometimes people have other obvious contributing problems, like they might have the potential of mold, or they might have potential of heavy metals, or there's always those other things you have to take into account that could be sort of first line problems before you hit the gut. So that's how you find me. I'm on all the different social media in some version of High Desert Health, but Becky, you can put those in the show notes.
Yeah, we will do that.
Absolutely. Oh, thank you. I'm so glad that our listeners get access to you and your podcast, the depth of your knowledge when it comes to gut health and autoimmune. It's really promising, I think, and to know that you're out there and people in one click can schedule a call with you is amazing. So thank you for your time and for sharing a little snippet of what's all in your brain with us today. Our first closing segment is 3 gold stars. So if you had to leave listeners with 3 top takeaways of our conversation today and what you'd recommend, what would you leave them with?
I guess I'd leave them with, if you're constipated, start with the magnesium citrate. If you have long-standing complex gut health issues, get tested first before you decide what to do. And if you have loose stool or diarrhea, start with some form of butyrate, like Tributyrin is the one that I make. Tributyrin Max is my product, or something like Probutyrate or Aurx, AURX. That's a powder one. Those are good starting places for trying to firm up stool and turn that whole thing around.
I love that you talk about stool all the time. And I love that your podcast is called The Perfect Stool? Mm-hmm. The Perfect Stool. Yep. So great. So great. All right. Next is Unleashing Ivy. Surprise questions. And I really want to circle back to Hashimoto's, because I feel like I hear about this all the time with women. I have clients that have Hashimoto's, and some of their doctors say, you got this forever. And some are like, no, we can work on this. And the fact that you have reversed this, what would you say to someone that's kind of recently got diagnosed with Hashimoto's or has been living with it for a while, and to give them hope and kind of maybe some steps to reverse it?
Okay, so first of all, you got to go gluten-free. And it probably isn't a bad idea to go dairy-free for a while too. If you're not lactose intolerant and you don't seem to be sensitive to dairy, then you can maybe bring it back in after a while. But I'd start with just an elimination diet. Just the general kind of all the big categories of not so great inflammatory foods. You probably need to do some work on your liver, like NAC and supplements like that, and cleansing your liver. And then you need to deal with your gut health issues because you probably have some. If you have Hashimoto's, that's probably how that started. So if you're bloating after you eat, you might have SIBO and you need to take care of that. So that would be the kind of major 3 steps that I would start with.
Okay. Love it.
Welcome to my side of the world. Whenever I hear, you should probably go dairy and gluten-free, I'm like, come on over. Oh, too funny. Okay, my question. This is where I'm at with my gut health journey. I'm debating a fecal transplant. No, I'm just kidding. But that's something that you talk a lot about, Lindsey, and I want to know more about that, what it is, and just give us a little scoop on fecal transplants. Why are they all the buzz right now?
So fecal transplants started out as something used for recurrent C. difficile infections. That's a bacteria that were not responsive to antibiotics. And that is currently the only approved use in the US. and other countries. They allow them for other diseases, and there are clinics in other countries where you can get them. And they are very successful, something in the 90% range for getting rid of C. diff. And other people use them either sort of under the counter kind of way or at home to deal with other gut health conditions. So I've had guests who've talked about not just gut health, but also mental health conditions who've talked about, I had a bipolar guest who basically got rid of that. And wow. I have another guest who had ulcerative colitis and used that to get rid of her I used fecal transplant to get rid of that. And but it's, there are studies done on these things, and it's not as effective as the C. diff. The C. diff is the big one. I did it myself with my husband's stool.
Wait, how do you do this?
So I took his stool, I blended it up in the blender and used an enema to put it back in.
Okay. I needed a visual here. Thank you for that.
Instructions. Apparently the blender's not ideal because you might maybe kill some bacteria in the blending process. It's better to just sort of mix it up with.
Do you ever get to use your blender again?
I cleaned it thoroughly. So there's ways of doing it. So officially, when you go to the hospital, they might use the procedure you use in a colonoscopy, like they might place it at the top of the colon, or you can also make capsules. And so some people make these, what they call crapsules, and they will, fill them up with stool, and you can officially get like these freeze-dried ones. If you're taking it officially.
Freeze-dried crapsules coming right up.
Brooke, what do you want for Christmas?
Another big application in autism using fecal transplants, because a lot of people with autism have gut health issues. And so it's been really successful in helping reverse a lot of the symptoms of autism.
And it's basically you're just getting healthy bacteria in your colon is the gist, right?
That and everything else that comes with it, right? Like, so there's the bacteria, but then there's also all of the postbiotics, everything that's produced by the bacteria, signaling molecules and all sorts of things there's so many different substances that we don't even know about. And then for the autism studies, they've been using a super purified form, and they now use that in C. diff. So I guess they've got 2 different products on the market that are now purified fecal transplants that you could take them like as a powder, like they're so purified there's no more fecal matter in it. So there are more options available now than just straight up fecal transplant.
Wow.
I kind of like that. Ian, how much do you love me? See how much your partner loves you if he's willing to give you a stool.
I've got great gut health, Brooke. We could really ramp up our business relationship.
Who wants to put their poop inside me? Going to the highest bidder.
Never have I ever. Oh man, that's good.
Oh,
Lindsey, you really do. Your brain, and we just, like Brooke said, just scratch the surface. So everybody tune in to The Perfect Stool. All right, last question. If you could go back, this doesn't have to do, you could talk about poop in this if you want to, or whatever you want. But if you could go back to younger Lindsey and tell her something, gut health related or not, what age would you go back to, and what would you tell her?
Well, since my mind is on the topic, I'll say I would go back to before I went to Costa Rica, and I would say, do not let any gut health issue linger for any length of time. You have what looks like traveler's diarrhea, like go see a doctor, get something for that right away. Like if it's not gone within 3 or 4 days, like go see someone, because if you let it linger on, then it can turn into something autoimmune. So yeah, that's what I'd say.
Deal with it right now.
Yep.
Don't wait.
Yep.
And I think that that's relatable to everyone listening. There's some issue that's just lingering and they're like, it's fine. It becomes their norm. They learn to deal with it. I'm just constipated. It's who I am. No, it actually doesn't have to be. So thank you for saying that.
Yeah.
And especially with constipation, you should not let that linger, because constipation can lead to cancer. You're letting toxins sit in your colon and they are leaking into your body. Yeah, it puts you at risk of cancer, so much higher risk. So yeah, you don't let constipation linger. You need to go poop every day.
Mm-hmm. Great advice. Wow. Well, thank you, Lindsey. I learned a lot today, and I like some of the words you use. I'm still like, what was that? But thank you for clarifying. You know, some of my questions sometimes I feel like are dumb because, you know, it's this different language. But I mean, the take homes I have makes so much sense for not like, you don't have to feel like this. You have to be alone feeling like this. And if you have questions, you have resources. There are people that are ready to help you. And the fact that you have a 30-minute call you can jump on for free, like, oh, people take it just to get some information and know if and when you're ready financially, or if and when it's the right time to have a coach, that you're ready for them. And so I'm just so grateful. I think as people age, they run into these issues a lot. I know a lot of people in my circle could really benefit from talking with you. So we're really grateful you exist, that you're doing this work, and we're so grateful for your time.
Thank you so much. I'm so grateful for you having me on.
Yeah. Yes. And last but not least, we leave our listeners with a piece of gold, a quote that speaks to you. Would you please share yours?
My general, I don't know if it's a quote per se, but is that everything is, that there's nothing is hopeless. Like there's always something you can do to improve your situation or your health. Like there's no condition that's hopeless. So just keep trying, like just keep plugging away.
This is Gold Ivy signing off.
Listen to your truth and go chase your gold.
Yay!
I love that quote.
That's a great quote, because what people really need is hope.